Na tadatinno sadatit tadanim nasidrajo no vyoma paroyat kimavarivaha kuha katya sharmannamba kimasit gahanam gabiram na mrutyurasidamrutam na tarhi na radya anasit praketa.
सृष्टि से पहले सत नहीं था, असत भी नहीं, अंतरिक्ष भी नहीं, आकाश भी नहीं था। छिपा था क्या, कहाँ, किसने ढका था? उस पल तो अगम अतल जल भी कहाँ था।
Vedanta was treated to be a subject for the sages in the mountain cave of their hermit in Himalayas. Swami Vivekananda made Vedanta relevant to modern times by making it practical, by taking abstract ideas and applying them to all fields of life. He did not restrict Vedanta to the realm of religion alone, but extended it to the fields of social philosophy, politics, and even science. We find him relating the doctrine of oneness and equality to ethics and politics, of the divinity of the soul to acts of social service, and of the diversity of spiritual paths to the question of tolerance and understanding between faiths. Swami Vivekananda introduced Vedanta in a totally new light. We have organized this webinar to rekindle interest on Vedanta and its study. We have 4 speakers today. The first speaker is Kumari Nivedita Raghunath Vide. She joined Vivekananda Kendra as a life worker, which is known as Jivan Brati, in 1977. During his 43 years association at Vivekananda Kendra, she discharged many responsibilities, including working in Arunachal Pradesh. She has written more than 20 books and innumerable papers in national and international journals. She represented the country in many international seminars. She is presently All India Vice President of Vivekananda Kendra. In 2017, she was decorated with Padma Shri Award. She will speak on Vedanta in daily life. She is our keynote speaker today. Didi, over to you.
My namaskars to you all. It's a pleasure to be here to listen to very eminent speakers on Vedanta and its applications. Swami Vivekananda's contribution in Vedanta is undisputable. But even seeing from the philosophical point of view, it is he, as Sister Nivedita mentions in her introduction to the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, that he brought together the Dvaita Darshan, Vishishta Advaita Darshan and Advaita Darshan in Vedanta. That is, they are not different, but they are various stages in the ultimate goal of realization of the self. Second thing, as we know that the world is coming closer due to science and technology. So just because physically we come to closer, it doesn't mean that we will accept each other. To accept each other, it needs a philosophy. And that philosophy, that philosophy
तो
of
ये আছে
acceptance
ওয়েবিনারে
of diversity, of mutual respect to diversity.
সাড়ে নটা
That mutual respect to diversity is possible only when there is understanding of Vedanta, Advaita, that is, or the oneness of the existence. Because we are all interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent. Everyone, though he may appear different, actually it is the extended form of oneself. And therefore, the mutual respect for differences or diversity. Nowadays, unity in diversity word I do not want to use, but it is the mutual respect for the diversity is possible only if the Advaita Vedanta is inculcated. Thirdly, as our very eminent physicist will be explaining further, Professor Siddhartha Sen, so I will not go into it, but I will just mention that as Swami Vivekananda said, that for science also, the discoveries in the science are just the distant echoes of what Vedanta is saying. Means, in a way, science is getting validated because of what it is realizing, the truth that is mentioned in Vedanta. So more about it, how the dual nature of the light, it is wave also, it is particle also, same way the Nirakar and Sakar, or we are all interconnected, interrelated, interdependent. All those ideas we shall be listening from him. But I will just quote here Swamiji's one quotation, what he says. He says, the other great idea that the world wants from us today, the thinking part of Europe, nay, the whole world, is that eternal grand idea of the spiritual oneness of the whole universe. I need not tell you today, men from Madras University, he was speaking in Madras University, how the modern researches of the West have demonstrated through physical means the oneness and the solidarity of the whole universe. How, physically speaking, you and me, the sun, moon, and the stars are but little waves or wavelets in the midst of an infinite ocean of matter. How Indian psychology, we have a speaker on psychology also, demonstrated ages ago that similarly both body and mind are but mere names or little wavelets in the ocean of matter, the samashti, and how, going one step further, it is also shown in the Vedanta that behind that idea of the unity of the whole show, the real soul is one. There is but one soul throughout the universe. All is but one existence. This great idea of the real and basic solidarity of the whole universe is the one great life-giving idea which the world wants from us today, and which the mute masses of India want for their uplifting. For none can regenerate this land of ours without the practical application and effective operation of this ideal of oneness of things. So he was so emphatic that India has to give message to the world, but in order to be able to give this message of oneness, the message of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, India herself needs to be raised. And for the national regeneration, again, it is the Vedanta alone which is going to help us to raise our masses. Thus, Swamiji's these 4-5 points, taking into it, its application, as again it was mentioned by Swami Vivekananda in various ways. And we are also having this webinar on the eve of Swami Vivekananda's birth anniversary, which comes on 12th January. So I would like to mention some few points. So first thing, when we say an individual is not just a body-mind complex, but it is that expanding consciousness, as one shloka what is chanted very often everywhere, akhanda mandalakaram vyaptam yena characharam tatpadam darshitam yena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was limiting my existence to this body mind intellect, but the guru, he showed me my real state of being, and that is the expanding consciousness which pervades the whole charachara. ये पूरे चराचर को व्याप्त करने वाली आत्म चेतना, वो मैं हूं. मैं सिर्फ ये शरीर मन बुद्धि नहीं हूं, तो वो आत्म चेतना मैं हूं. तत्पदम दर्शितम येन तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः. तो फिर इसका प्रैक्टिकल एप्लीकेशन क्या है? यानी इफ वी सी दैट मैन, व्हेन आई से आई, my expanded form is my family, my still expanding form or extended form is my society, my still extended form is my civilization, my nation, and my still extended form is this whole existence. Therefore my life should be such that I know my that real nature Atman, वो आत्म चेतना का साक्षात्कार करना. और दूसरा, यह जो शरीर मन बुद्धि है, to employ it in the service of all these collectives of which I am part. So my life should be such that I bring harmony, I bring peace, I bring enrichment to my family, to my society, to my civilization, and to the whole nature existence. So this is how twofold a man should live his life. One, he should strive to get rooted in one's own being, and two, he should lead the life in such a way that he is a blessing to all the collectives of which he is part. That is the family, society, nation, and the whole creation. Then another thing, what this again Advaita Vedanta stresses is that our life is not meaningless. We are not born, just out of an accident or without any purpose. We are not sinners, but we are potentially divine. As Swami Vivekananda says, each soul is potentially divine. The goal of life is to manifest that divinity by controlling the nature, external and internal. Do this by work or worship, by psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all, and be free. So my whole life is meant to manifest the best in me, and therefore I have to strive to manifest that excellence in me, and also to get rooted in my real being, what has manifested as all this. So this is the purpose of human life, and therefore, as Swami Vivekananda says, that we do not have the concept of sin. It's only out of ignorance I do this. So the action which covers my divine nature is sin, and the action which opens or breaks that cover is the meritorious act, and that is how the papa punya are decided. So anything which expands me, that is good, and anything which constricts me, narrows me down, that is not good. So if we apply that, then my life cannot be excessively individualistically only for myself. I have to live for my family, for society, for the nation, for the whole creation, because these are all my extended forms. If I don't contribute to that, I am actually my wholesome development is not taking place. For example, let us say a child is growing and it's only one leg is growing and the other parts are not growing, then it is not a growth. So same way, these are all my extended forms, and therefore, as the Vedic prayer goes, Antariksha Shantihi, Dev Shantihi, Prithvi Shantihi. So this is how it should be. Another a very psychological, beautiful application of it is that any problem in life, bring change in yourself. That is what Vedanta says. Vedanta doesn't say that you try to change other things. There is nothing other. The real change starts from here. You change here and then the change comes. This is what happens. We all know that if weather is hot, we bring change in our clothing. We bring change in we put on AC. If it is very cold, we wear warm clothes. So we bring change in ourselves. If a big bull is coming on the road, I just move aside. I don't say I am so and so. I bring change in myself. I move aside. But when it comes to human beings, we say the others should change. And that is where the application of Vedanta stops. For with other things, we do it naturally. But this is what we have to do. If we understand this, even our relationships, even our behavior, a great, tremendous change will come in that. And therefore, Swami Vivekananda says, take whole responsibility on your shoulders. Start with yourself. Any change comes only with yourself. And then coming to the point what Swami Vivekananda had told, a very great point, and that is Sir Man, Sir God. That is how he was so much inspired when his guru said, Jivadaya, Jivadaya, who are we to show the compassion to others? It is only Shiva Bhave Jiva Seva, Jiva Seva, Jiva Seva. And Swami Vivekananda started dancing. He said, I have got the mantra for this age. इस आज के काल के लिए हमने कैसे जीवन जीना है, इसका मंत्र मुझे मिल गया है. And that is what is Sir Man, Sir God. And that's what Sister Nivedita, she again writes very beautifully in the introduction to the complete works to Swami Vivekananda. She says, if the many and the one be indeed the same reality, then it is not all modes of worship alone, but equally all modes of work, all modes of struggle, all modes of creation, which are paths of realization. No distinction henceforth between sacred and secular. For us, everything becomes sacred. To labor is to pray, to conquer is to renounce. Life is itself religion. To have and to hold is as stern a trust as to quit and to avoid. And that's how she says, art, science, and religion. She quotes Swami Vivekananda, art, science, and religion are but three different ways of expressing a single truth. But in order to understand this, we must have the theory of Advaita. And this is what today we are going to see, the different aspects of Advaita Vedanta. But again, focusing on this Sir Man, Sir God, what Swami Vivekananda had said, that he said, worship the Murkha Narayano Bhava, Daridra Narayano Bhava. See, there is one name for God, Vibhu. Vibhu means Visheshena Bhavati, जो विशेष रूप से प्रकटित होता है, who is manifested specially. So see the divine in all those who are suffering, who are fallen and the downtrodden, and serve them. And that's what he says, 100,000 men and women fired with the zeal of holiness, fortified with the eternal faith in Lord, nerve to the lion's courage by their sympathy. Why lion's courage? Because of their sympathy, because of that oneness, that feeling, atmiyata, wo apnapan ke karan, because of their sympathy for the fallen and for the poor and the fallen and the downtrodden, shall go to the length and breadth of this land, preaching the gospel of equality, gospel of social raising up, gospel of help. So really speaking, if the Advaita Vedanta is expressed in our life, then we are really considerate towards others, we live for others, and then as Swamiji says, they alone live who live for others, the rest are more dead than alive. This is what really happens. And India will have to raise herself with Advaita Vedanta, and it is this philosophy which also our whole humanity needs. So with these words, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Didi. It was a well beginning of our webinar. Now our next speaker is Professor Siddhartha Sen. Let me introduce Professor Sen. Professor Sen was born in 1941. He is a fellow emeritus in pure and applied mathematics in Trinity College, Dublin. He did his MSc from Calcutta University and doctorate from MIT. His specializations are differential geometry, theoretical high energy physics, theoretical biology, and theoretical condensed matter physics. He is presently involved in a few projects involving physics. He has published large number of papers in journals of international repute. He will speak on Vedanta and physics. Professor Sen.
Thank you very much. I will start somewhere in a place called Concord, Massachusetts. In 1845 and 1847, Henry David Thoreau built himself a cottage near a pond there called Walden, and he reflected on his own life, and he felt that he needed solitude to think about why he was there, what was the purpose of life, and questions of that kind. He had been influenced by the ideas of Vedanta through his friendship with Emerson. There's a little story which I will take as my starting point, which Thoreau tells us. In the city of Kuru in India, there was an artist who had a striving, a feeling, a sense of perfection. One day, it suddenly occurred to him that he should make a perfect staff. Immediately, he got up and went to the woods to get the wood to make the staff. If you are making a normal thing, time is a constraint. But if you're looking for perfection, time has no role. So as he searched, his friends slowly passed away, the years went away, and then after he had found his staff and made and completed it, the North Pole had shifted, Brahman had gone through slumber and woken several times, but he felt nothing. He did not see the passage of time because time left him alone, could not overcome him because of his obsession. As soon as the staff was completed, suddenly he had a revelation and he sought perfection in front of him. Now, the idea is that human beings have this inner urge to seek perfection in whatever they do. It could be as an artist, as a novelist, as a mathematician, as a painter. You are striving for perfection. What is perfection? That's a difficult question, but one essential part is perfection seeks to find the essence of something which is unchanging. This unchanging essence we can call reality, the real. Now, from this point of view, science, in its unstated quest for perfection, is looking for a perfect understanding of the working of the world. The world is constantly changing. Our bodies are made in our brains or anywhere else. There are these amino acids, but they get replaced. Our whole body gets replaced after a certain number of the skin gets replaced and so on. But all the time we feel we're the same. So there is something unchanging, which is not this material constituents of ourselves. In the physical sciences, the great people, the giants of science, slowly established that this constant change that we see all around us, the wind and the ocean and the explosions and the decay of things, all of those things can be understood in terms of a small number of objects: space, time, matter, and energy. And slowly it became clear that everything we see will be really lumps of energy, which we call matter, and energy distributed over space, which we call fields. And all the changes and things which we witness can be explained using unchanging, time-independent laws of nature. So there was this unchanging part, which is a facet of reality. So reality is defined as something outside the realm of space, time, and causality. And physics, which looks at dead matter most of the time, is able to touch or reach out some features, some facets of this reality. It is a constant quest. Slowly, the different laws which were needed to explain what was observed were narrowed down, and at a fundamental level, slowly it looked as if there was just this single glimmering idea of a grand unified theory. It is still aspiration, and it is still work in progress. Now, from this point of view, I would suggest that Vedanta is the quest for a perfect understanding of existence. It is a quest to discover the eternal laws of existence. In that sense, they override, or they are an archway for all other activities which are taking place. Now, this search was conducted in a very, very precise way. If I take the Mundukya Upanishad as an example, there the first thing is to understand something, you have to use a name. So they use the word Brahman to represent reality. Then there is a symbol, and the symbol represents this reality, and the symbol chosen was Om. Now this symbol, one can say, tells you the limitations of anything which can be said. So it tells us that when you're searching for this reality, there are limitations which come from the limitations of our senses. What we can achieve depends on what we perceive, and we are limited by our senses. And the sages looked at their experiences, and in 3 steps, they were able to suggest that underlying what we see, there is an unchanging reality. The world is changing, but there is this unchanging reality. The first step is to say that whatever we see is real. But then, if you look at your dreams, then in a vivid dream, there is very little distinction between a vivid dream and what you experience every day. So logically, it was hard to separate. So from that point of view, it was dismissed that what we see is not real. It is changing, and reality has to be unchanging. Then you have deep sleep. In deep sleep, you don't see changes. You don't see differences, but you start and then you wake up. So it is time bound. So it is still not real using the definition introduced. And then the sages told us from their authentic experiences that there is another stage. And in this stage, there is no change. There is no differences, and that is the ultimate reality. Now, this is a hypothesis. This is a theoretical construct, almost like a mathematical proof. But then what you have is a proof that such a thing exists. And this is where they step forward and say, yes, this thing exists, and we can realize it if we are determined and interested in doing this. And this is what is suggested, and a particular procedure for doing this was then done. And this is say that the purpose of our life is a choice. You don't have to follow this, but it is our destiny to try and follow and get this self-realization. So what we see then is Maya. It's an illusion. Now, in physics, this has already been established in the sense that we know that when we look at a table, it is really made of atoms and molecules and so on. So what we see is not what is perceived. When we look at a human being, we see differences between human beings, but then we know at a biological scale, there are the DNA and things of that kind, which are the same. The slight differences in the DNA organization, but the basic building blocks, ACTG, are the same. And so there's a unity which is present at the scientific level. But the level of unity of Vedanta is much greater. And so it tells us that irrespective of where you belong, whether you believe in one religion or another religion, this eternal law applies. And so that all are welcome, and all who go along this path have the possibility of being successful in getting this self-realization. And that is one of the purposes of life. In the sciences, you have a similar thing. Contributions to science do not depend on the kind of clothes you wear or the kind of food you eat. It completely depends on your ability and your interest. And there are contributions from people all over the world all the time. So I think this is a very interesting thing to contemplate, this profound insight, this profound speculation, which has no parallel anywhere. It is an amazing speculation, and it gives us great hope. It tells us that if you're searching for a reality, no matter what you're doing, if you're searching for perfection, you have a chance. And that's very, very uplifting. And people who get involved in it can get great joy in pursuing such an aim. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Professor Shane. In the meantime, I have received a question specifically for you. We'll come to the question answer session. When we come to that session, I will put the question to you.
Okay.
It's related to something in mathematics. Our next speaker is Dr. Indranil Boshurai. He is a staff cardiologist and cardio-electrophysiologist. He is a director of cardiovascular research, chair, Interdepartmental Council for Cardiopulmonary Resuscitation. He's an adjunct professor in the School of Public Health in the University of Memphis, USA. Now, Indranil is the chairman of American Academy of Yoga and Meditation, and he's a co-chair of Ganges, Mississippi Dialogue. He will speak on Vedanta and human body. Indranil.
Thank you, Nirmalada, for the rather eloquent introduction. It is a pleasure to be with all of you today. Years back, I had a personal experience that really changed my life. when I was pretty young in school, I had read a book called The Tao of Physics. In that book, one of the fathers of modern day physics, quantum mechanics, Werner Heisenberger, had said, what we are finding today are not inventions because they are discoveries, because they have been invented by Hindu and Buddhist sages long back. So that was something that was very startling till I had this personal experience. I met my guru when I was in first year of medical school. And once I decided to follow him to a small ashram in Rourkela. So on the way, we chatted, we talked about medicine and other thing. I was a young first-year medical student, didn't have much of an idea. But what I did know after studying biology is things like blood pressure, blood sugar, all these things are not controlled by you or me. It's controlled by places inside the body, what we call autonomic function. Or in other words, whether you wish or you do not wish, your blood pressure will be maintained at a particular level. Whether you wish or you do not wish, your blood sugar has to be maintained at a particular level. And that is what we call human homeostasis. Or in other words, that's how the body mechanic works, so that everything inside the environment inside the body is absolutely maintained. I was quite startled when I heard my guru, who at that time was 84. He took sannyas after passing engineering at a young age. He became an engineer in 1937, when very few people in India would have become engineer at that time. And then he went to take sannyas. He said, no, for a sannyasi, people who meditate, people who do yoga, there's nothing called autonomous. You can control things called autonomous. So obviously, being a young, vibrant medical student, this was against my religion. I couldn't really accept what he said. And then a very interesting incident occurred. After we reached Rourkela, in the evening, he called me to see his blood pressure, and I found his blood pressure was 0. So that startled me. I tried measuring his blood pressure a couple of times. Every time I did it, it is 0. So I said he must go to the nearby hospital. He did not agree. He said, no worries, everything will be fine. But finally, I got so scared. I was really terrorized. I didn't want my guru to die in front of my own arms. I said, you should go. So anyway, finally, he went to a hospital. And at the hospital also, they measured his blood pressure. It was still 0. So I felt relieved that a first-year medical student at least knows how to measure blood pressure, and it is really 0. But the funny part is, and that's where the interesting part of the story, when he came within few minutes, his blood pressure went back to normal. They didn't even have to give him a single injection, any saline or any fluid. So from that time till today, after having seen thousands and thousands of patients, I have always decided it is really mind-boggling for me to understand how the body works. Now, when we think how the body works, we are really surprised because human body, according to Vedanta, has got 3 different layers. There is the physical body, there is what we call the subtle body, and there is the causal body. There are the 3 different bodies. Now, the physical body is the body that you see. You see and I see, every one of us sees. The subtle body is made of over 19 elements, and that is the body that comes when we do things. For example, when our mind thinks, when we have emotions. So that is called the subtle body. And the causal body is sort of an imprint that carries the imprint of our multiple births through which we are born. So based on Hindu philosophy, based on Vedanta, that is the body that tells us where we are going to go, but the problem is that we don't see all these 3 bodies. So are they true? Is Vedanta true? Now, as I said, sages have decided to go and find this out by going to deep meditation. So there are 2 ways of finding something. One way is how the modern scientist does it. You show something in the lab. You cannot show something in the lab, you hypothesize. Like people hypothesize there's something going to be called a Higgs boson, and then finally it was found in a particle accelerator in Geneva. So you hypothesize with the hope that it will come out in the future. You will discover it in the future. But the Vedanta way of looking is different. The Vedanta way of looking is this, that the whole universe is one. So you do have access to this information, but you got to turn your inner thoughts to that level of energy that will make you perceive this information. So in other words, the so-called sages that Werner Heisenberger was talking about, who already knew all this, was because they could train their mind to reach that level of existence where they could pick up the truth of the universe. Because as Vedanta says, the whole universe is one. You're part and parcel of that. You're nothing, something separate, something different. So when we have these three bodies, we have a physical body that you and I see. We have a subtle body which includes our mind, buddhi, our consciousness, chitta. And then we have so-called body, which is, most saints say that is only found when you are in deep meditation. As you know, there are different states, like what Dr. Sen said. There is dream state, there are wakeful state. And there's a state called turiya, where you're neither dreaming nor you're awake, but you're in a state where the mental functions are so altered that you can pick up the truth of the universe. Now, as all of us know that physics started many years back saying that we have something called a Big Bang. One universe was created, and that universe is expanding now. This has been a standard thought for a long time. Contrarily, in his London lecture, Vivekananda says that there are basically two things in this universe. One is Akasha, which is responsible for material, and one is prana. So at the beginning, there was nothing, and then prana strikes on Akasha, and Akasha creates all that we see: multiple stars, multiple planets, galaxies, super galaxies, black holes, name it. Everything is getting created. And prana is the second thing, which is the force. Now we have so much, we think about so much forces, some of which we know, like for example, we know gravity. People say it's actually a particle called graviton, which has yet to be discovered. There are weak forces, there are strong forces, there are electromagnetic forces, there are multiple forces. So according to Vivekananda, all the forces are just manifestation of that prana or energy. Now, modern science has uncannily started saying exactly or similar things. Today, based on what the Princeton physicist John Wheeler said, that there can actually, it's not that there's one universe which starts. There could be something called a metaverse, or the mother universe, which Vivekananda talks about. Initially, there was silence. Silence doesn't mean that there was nothing. It was pregnant with creation. And then creation happened. Not one universe, maybe multiple universes were created. Each universe went its own pathway. Our universe took this particular pathway, which brought life into us. So see the uncanny similarity between what is being thought. It's still a hypothesis. Nobody says what John Wheeler said is the only truth. There are other hypotheses also. But this is at least something that cosmologists believe is science. It is not metaphysical. It is not a philosopher in 1890 talking about philosophy, that is Swami Vivekananda. It is similar to what some of the world's latest cosmologists are at least thinking that could be the. So there are multiple universes, one giving rise to the other, one giving rise to the other. And so that is where we reached. Furthermore, if we see, what we are finding now is that we might be existing in multiple dimensions. So the causal body we are talking about, or the subtle body we are talking about, may not exist in the material dimension that we are seeing. You might say, what does that mean? If it is there, why can't you see? Well, that's very simple. If you are a snake, if you are in the jungle, you can see a small rat going a mile away from you because you have to eat that rat. Because the eye receptors in the snake eyes have something called rhodopsin, which can pick up very low light. But we don't have that capacity. The dog in your house will bark if somebody is walking. A thief is trying to enter your house. You cannot hear that, but the dog can hear. Why? Because dog can hear 0 decibel. You can only hear from 20 to 20,000 decibel. So any sound below that you cannot hear. So just because you cannot see, I can see from 350 to 750 hertz. That is the vibration of the waves I can see. There are millions of hertz before the millions of hertz later on. So those I cannot see. That doesn't mean they don't exist. So there are this concept that has come up, which are hardcore concepts of Vedanta in modern science today. So the 3 bodies that we talked about, it's quite possible that when we die and we leave the physical body, the other 2 bodies sorts of leaves us, could be in a different dimension. And science says that the dimension doesn't have to be in a different world. You can have small, what is known as the Calabi-U bodies. You can have multiple small or huge dimension curled inside this very world. And you and I may not see it because our eyes are meant to see 3-dimensional. Our brain is meant to interpret 3-dimensional spaces. So any of the higher dimensional spaces, I would have no idea what it is, even if it is there next to me. There could be a huge planet next to me made of antimatter. I won't be able to see it. There could be an entire galaxy next to me made of antimatter. I won't be able to see it. That doesn't mean that doesn't exist. It is our restricted capacity, which in other words is the Maya. Because what we are seeing is virtual. Like this table as I'm sitting is so hard. If I hit my hand against it, I'll have pain. I might even have a fracture. But the truth is none of this exists. This is made of smoky, ghostly cloud particles. So this cloud of particles doesn't even have an existence. So now, but when we see it as a hard, whether it is made up of electron, proton, neutron. Electron is just a cloud. Let me, for example, give you an example. So when you have something in quantum state, it could have different manifestation. One manifestation is called superposition. What does superposition mean? Like we have heard miracles, right? We have heard a person, a sadhu appear in 2 different places at the same time. So electron is almost behaves like that. There's nothing called one single electron. There's always a cloud of electron. When you try to see it, then you will see that the electron boils down to one particular place. But if you don't try to see it, it is just a cloud. It could appear in Bombay, it could appear in Delhi, it could appear in Washington, it could be everywhere. It's just a cloud. Just like a sadhu, as we hear in miracles, could be appearing in Benares or in Rishikesh or in Delhi or in Calcutta all together at the same time. Now, how they do it, if that is true or not, I don't know. I don't want to even go into that. But what I want to go into that is, it is possible that some of this quantum behavior, which is found in the smallest particles, can be seen in macro life too. And that's what we today call quantum biology. So quantum biology is the biological body that we have, which behaves not like a mass, not like a star or a human body, a mass which you can see. If you hit me, I'll get pain, but behaves in a quantum fashion, or as if it's available everywhere. For example, all these leaves which produce chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is produced in a way which follows what is known as superposition. Why? Because when the light strikes, it's like a billiard ball. If you hit a billiard ball, it goes and hits 10 different billiard balls. The 10th billiard ball will be slowest because the 9, 6, 7, 8, each of the billiard balls gets slower till it goes to the last one. But the chlorophyll, the photon hitting the leaf, is carried to the center, which actually produces chlorophyll without loss of any energy. So it does not follow the rule of modern day Newtonian physics, where you hit something and then it moves to the next place. You hit something, it moves to the next place. It doesn't do that. So, and what is more funny is that you guys know there are birds like robin, European robin. Robin goes more than 400, sometimes even 1,000 miles, going from the North Switzerland, Sweden, Finland to warm climate during winter into Spain, Portugal. How do they know? What GPS system do they have? Even the smallest GPS today costs $250. How does the small bird do it? So they do using quantum mechanics. And now we have actual evidence that our brain, maybe the prana that we call the subtle body, works in the form of quantum. The multiple thoughts that we have is basically a quantum tunneling effect, or in other words, we have thoughts in multiple places in our brain. The most important thought, which is decided by the chitta, which is the consciousness, and the mind, may be quantum tunnels, and then comes out one particular thought which we as human beings are thinking. The only difference is when you are thinking as a human being who is not trained, whose mind is like what Vivekananda said, like a monkey jumping around. And the medical equivalent of that is if you do a EEG of my brain, you'll find fast waves going around. This fast waves, it causes randomization within the brain. That brain is ineffective. But people who meditate, they have extremely slow waves. They have beta waves, they have delta waves, they have gamma waves. The brain slows down. When brain slows down, maybe you see this quantum effect. And those are the special powers that people get when they practice meditation for a long time. So with this, I'd like to end with this thing that our thought process, which the saints and sages have said millions of years back, is now being used by a lot of people to understand the nature around us. And as Nivedita Didi said, the whole universe is one. I have a different skull and you have a different skull, so you think I cannot talk with you. Yes, that's true to some extent at the practical level. But there are sages with years of meditation who can pass you thoughts without even talking. Actually, this has been my own personal experience. Though I have none of such powers, when I used to talk with my guru, I didn't even have to physically talk. I used to bring up a thought in my mind and he would give an answer. So it's time to understand the nature. So that's where the science of Vedanta comes. Vedanta is there everywhere. Whether you know it, whether you're ignorant of it, or whether you're knowledgeable of it, that's what makes the difference. Namaskar.
Thank you, Indranil. Our last speaker is Rajashree Roy Bandopadhyay. She is a consultant psychiatrist and psychotherapist. She is a MD, FRC Psych. I think it is equivalent of FRCP in psychiatry, right? From UK. And CCT UK, PGD MLE from Bangalore, and PGM HSC UK. She is an associate professor of psychiatry. She is associated with a few healing centers. I will not call these as hospitals or clinics because people go to her when they are mentally disturbed. She will speak on Vedanta and mind. Before she takes over, she starts speaking. Let us tell briefly about what is AAYM and what is GMD. AAYM is American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. It was formed on 5th of November 2019 with the aim of popularizing yoga in true form. What is true form we'll discuss on another day, not today. And a lot of people have associated themselves in different works. People are joining. It is in the form now in the stage of a proper formation. GMD is an associate of AAYM. GMD is Ganges Mississippi Dialogue. Our three areas of focus are education, healthcare, and livelihood. We have this particular webinar is under the banner of GMD. Mostly the medical webinars are under the banner of AAYM. And we are very happy that Nivedita Didi has agreed to be one of the mentors of GMD. Now, GMD has not yet been registered. The process is on. We are registering ourselves as a Section 8 non-profit company in India. And we will have a lot of works at the ground, particularly in the areas of education, healthcare, and livelihood. Now, I would now request Rajashree to put forward her deliberations.
Thank you, Nirmaluda. Namaskar and good evening to all the viewers today. And thank you to GMD and AAYM for requesting me to come and share this platform tonight or this morning, with some of the most esteemed people in this field. And I must say, my experience and sort of understanding and learning with sort of Vedanta is nothing as compared to what my esteemed seniors have just been discussing. But being a psychiatrist, I've been trying to focus, as Professor Basurai was also mentioning, the ancient and the modern medicine, and trying to see what we can learn from our ancient scriptures. And that is why my interest in Vedanta and my topic, which Nirmaluda has requested me to try to touch on today, is mind according to Vedanta. Now, as we know, Vedanta, literally it means the end of the Vedas, and originally it was intended to signify the collection of writings called the Upanishads. But the word Veda means knowledge or wisdom, so the real literal meaning of Vedanta is the end of knowledge. But what is it then about Vedanta that infuses the mind, with such delight and happiness just by the fact when we hear this simple word Vedanta? There's so much of joy in this world. And as Nivedita ji has sort of talked a lot about Swami Vivekananda, we realized that it was sort of Swami Vivekananda. He found immense practical significance for Advaita Vedanta. And he showed that Vedanta itself is a science, and it is a science of consciousness. And here is a huge overlap with modern psychiatry, which in my limited and humble attempt to understand the impact of Vedanta and the mind, I'm going to try and touch upon them today. Now, we know the mind plays a most crucial role in human life. An individual's real strength lies not really in his muscle strength, but it is the tranquility of his mind. It is vital for his or her survival, for his success, for fulfillment. It gives us a source of power, creativity, self-confidence. Whether we are a saint or a mystic, or even simple like Professor Sen, who's a scientist, or an artist, an engineer, even a workman, it is the mind. And we know in our Bhagavad Gita, the 4th chapter, it is said that if you have he who is the master of his mind is a sage, while he who is a slave to his mind is a fool. So our mind is our best friend when we keep it under control, and it's our worst enemy when we lose control over it. So in a way, I really try and ponder, and to be honest, I don't think we really know. It is not. We know it's not an organ system which we can visualize, or see, or dissect, or see it in a scan, whichever scans we use. So, what is the mind? Where is the philosophy of what is the mind? Now, there are thinkers who've tried to explain that the mind, like it's a function of the brain. Someone says it's a product of heredity, a product of the environment, a byproduct of the bodily processes. There are so many views on this, but these views describe how the mind acts and reacts, but not why or how. So the seers of Vedanta actually have given a very spiritual interpretation of man and his mind. A mind, according to them, is a positive entity that stands between the body and the senses on the one hand, and the knowing self on the other. So body and the senses on one hand, and the knowing self, so the knower and the seer there. So while the knowing self of an individual is a focus of all-pervading universal self, as we said, we all are part of this wider consciousness, the mind serves as the ego self. It is the leader of the sense organs. Now, while we talk a little bit more about this, I'm hoping I'll be able to explain what I mean. But before that, I just want to touch on Vedanta clearly talks about the 4 aspects of mind, and Professor Basurai already mentioned about the chitta. So first is we have the manas, which is like the outer level of the mind, which is that part where, part of our mind, which takes care of the mechanical, the mundane functions, and is bombarded, with all the constant movement, the plethora of inputs, where we have, it's a lot of noisy loudness in that part. That's the manas, the outer part. Then we have the ahankar, the next inner layer, where it is the ego part. Okay. So here you have a sense of identity, or the I-ness. So it is the level of the mind with the actual division with the self and the other, the subject, the object, that takes place. Then we come to the buddhi, the buddhi part, the third part, where it is the quality of the inner knowing. And that is our great wise counselor. This is more refined sense of knowing. It's like existing in the proximity to our main source. It's really very close to the inside, the chitta, whereas the final part inside, we have the chitta, the memory bank part of the mind. So now keeping this in mind, the four parts of, which sort of Vedanta describes as the mind in a way, the four functions. Now we talk about what are the functions of the mind? Because we do not know, we haven't seen the mind. It is an experience, an experiential thing, It is actually our second body, or it is the subtle body. And it has four main functions. One is deliberation, two, determination, three, the I consciousness, and fourth is the memory. So the relation between the subtle body and the gross body is like that, I'll give you an example on this. It's like a seed and a plant, okay? Both of them are of the same material. Of course, I will talk about the four functions I've mentioned. I will come to them. But before that, I just want to say, describe to you the relation between the body and the mind. Here, we have, the body, as we all know, we all recognize and acknowledge it has got five gross elements, whether it's earth, air, water, ether, and fire. In fact, the mind is also made of these subtle forms, the earth, air, water, ether, and fire. So the body derives its consciousness from the mind, and the mind from the self. So it is not destroyed, as we know, it is not destroyed with the death of the body. And it keeps, the chitta, it is the receptacle of the memories of the past lives. And it's explained in Vedanta that it transmigrates from one birth to the other. And each person is born with a particular mind that he or she brings from the past. And probably that is where the karma yoga, the karmic actions come into discussion here as well. That it is this mind that seeks expression through thoughts and actions in the present life. And as a modern practicing psychiatrist, who's trained both in UK and in India, this concept of thoughts and actions, are very much talked and discussed in principles of psychotherapy, where we try to talk about changing someone's behavior, changing someone's actions. And I must say, in psychiatry these days, Nimhans is actually pioneering a lot of focus. Professor Gangadhar has been pioneering a lot of focus on the Bhagavad Gita. A manual is being converted, tried to talk about Bhagavad Gita and how that can be used in modern day psychotherapy. So there is work in progress to beautifully, bring together the old, the heritage, the old traditions of from the scriptures into this modern medicine, as we call it. So as we said, so we have these four functions. And we also have, there are three levels, and we were just talking about the different stages of sleep, which is more described in the Mandukya Upanishad. But here in Vedanta as well, the mind has three levels of consciousness. First is the subconscious, then is the conscious, and then we have the superconscious. Now, we know the conscious, we all, like I'm conscious now. I'm able to make a decision, I'm able to make choices, talk to you, make a valued judgment about, how much I should say, keep a track on the time. So these are the conscious decisions. Now, beneath the conscious is our subconscious, that is the hidden and the unperceived. And that exerts its influence on the conscious. So it's a constant exerting influence on the conscious. The conscious is actually like the steering of an automobile, and the subconscious is the propulsion force. Okay? And above this conscious level, we have a third level, and that is the superconscious, where the individual consciousness comes in contact with the universal consciousness. And as right in the very beginning, Nivedita ji sort of mentioned about we are part of this whole. And Professor Basuri also mentioned that, we may have two different skulls, but, we're all somehow linked up. But it's actually trying to be able to understand this fact. And we have to start exploring this theory and be much more acceptable. Because once, if we are skeptical in our attempts to understand the Vedanta and its effect on the mind and how we link it up with modern medicine, we won't really go too far. Because, as we will understand, it is through meditation that we can start understanding these, and get connected with this, with the universal consciousness. So let's be open to the understandings of, how the conscious, the subconscious, and the universal consciousness are guided by the instinct, the reasonings, and the superconscious by the intuition, or which we call the I consciousness. So Vedanta talks about, as we said, what are the paths, what are the functions, and what are the levels of the mind in terms of consciousness and the areas of functioning. Now, as a psychiatrist, of course, and one of the reasons why I'm here tonight is to talk about the impact of it. So far, so good. But what do you do with it? We are all restless, and we recognize restless mind by several signs. It is dull, sometimes excited, sometimes scattered. We can never concentrate. And these are not just modern medicine and psychiatry that talks about these features. Our age-old Vedantas, scriptures have spoken about these. The impulsive, the hypersensitive, the person with the low frustration, the low tolerance. What happens here? It is the mind. It is the mind that gets carried by the waves of impulses, it's darkened by imagination, it's unstable, it's fickle, full of desires. It's a constant prey to delusions, or the mayas, as we call it, and the fancies, the fantasies in a way. It is secretive, negative, divided, discontented. And that is, as a psychiatrist, we try, to have the pessimism, we convert that to an optimism. And we try to harness these anxieties and tensions. And we can easily do that with an understanding of Vedanta. And in fact, we can talk to our patients about it. It makes sometimes much more easy for them to understand, what is happening. Our patients come and talk to us, okay, so is it a nerve disorder? Is it, what disorder is this? So we don't have the answers. But if we start talking in terms of the Vedantic philosophy, it might help. Am I okay with time for a few minutes more, Nirmalada? Okay.
How many minutes more?
A few minutes more? Would that be okay?
How much more time do you need?
I need 2-3 minutes.
Few minutes.
2 to 3 minutes more. Is that all right?
Okay, fine. You continue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So as we say, there are 5 causes of suffering according to Vedanta. Number 1, ignorance. Ignorance, it blocks the perception of the reality of oneness. Number 2 is the deluded ego that projects its own world of fancies and desires. Number 3 is a deep attachment, which expresses itself as possessiveness. Number 4 talks about the strong aversion which seeks really, always trying to seek pleasures and shuns the painful. And number 5 is the changes in life, which is the inability to change and grow. So the impurities of the mind, as we know, are subtle deposits of the past, a lot of indulgent livings. So I will quickly summarize and talk about what do you do. So we recognize there's a problem. We know there's a restless mind. We know there's a mind that is we have to perceive, and it's a part of the consciousness and the universal consciousness. But Vedanta talks about the way to overcome the restless mind, according to the seers of Vedanta, is not to avoid or run away from it, but to face it. And how do you face it? This facing the mind has 4 aspects. First is a self-acceptance, where you understand, you do not feel helpless, you do not feel negative. You understand there's a problem and you have to find a way out, number 1. Number 2 is a self-control, where with a lot of effort, you try to control what is happening, why is it happening. You can do it with a lot of techniques and desires. How do you control your desires? And that can be done through detachment, feelings of withdrawal of the mind, and understanding things. The third thing, as we said, is the self-control, self-acceptance. And of course, we have to go for self-regulation. And where you have a discipline to your life, you try to understand things, you can, with meditation, yoga, it becomes vital. And finally is the moderation. moderation where you form a middle point. You think, life should be the fourth aspect where, you must, human nature, it should not be hurried. Old habits die hard, and we must try to give efforts to change our weak habits and try to reinvent ourselves and re-explore ourselves and accept ourselves. Because I will conclude by one of Swami Vivekananda's quotes. He says, "Never say any man is hopeless, because he only represents a character, a bundle of habits, which can be checked by new and better ones. Character is repeated habits, and repeated habits alone can reform the character." So on that note, I will end this brief sort of a summary about my understanding about mind according to Vedanta. And thank you for giving me this opportunity on this very esteemed platform. And over to you, Nirmalada. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajashree. Now, as I said earlier, there is a specific question for Professor Siddhartha Sen related to mathematics. The question is, Kurt Gödel published in 1931 two theorems on incompleteness of mathematical logic. Can this be explained in the light of Vedanta?
What
Brief
Gödel,
answer.
yeah, Gödel result was one of the great discoveries of the 20th century. Okay, and he was saying that there could be statements which are true, but which are not captured by a finite logical system. Now, Roger Penrose has tried to use this idea to explain consciousness and the role gravitation plays in it. So as far as Vedanta is concerned, you see, Vedanta is not, when I was talking about the thing, the last point was that the existence part was that when you have self-realization, you are one with Brahman. You're not a part. And this is an extraordinary strong statement. This thing tells you that if you have parts of something, which is a particular true result, right, it cannot fit into a finite postulatory system. So, on the other hand, human beings have proved such a theorem. Okay, so the method of proving such a result by a human being seems to be very special, right? So I don't think one can say that Vedanta can prove a particular theorem or a particular result, but what it can do is say if something is true, right, then it is part of reality. And part of reality is what Vedanta is all about. So in that sense, right, I think, see, one should be very clear that there are statements in the Vedanta which are scientifically wrong. For example, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it says rain is from the urine of the celestial horse. Now, I don't think too many people accept that as a literary thing. The strength of it, the Upanishad and the Vedanta, is there's an overarching, beautiful, unified picture which can be used in a creative way by everyone. And as it was said right at the beginning, that there are people who can use it, and as it was said by the professor of cardiology, that you see, you don't have to be very special or anything like that. You are all Brahman, potentially. So it is not, you should not be feeling, if you're not getting enough food or anything like that, by having a picture of self-esteem, you can suddenly get up and you can do things which otherwise you thought you were not capable of doing. So it is uplifting. It gives you aspiration. It puts you on equality. You are not inferior to anyone. So I'm digressing a little bit, but you can see that all of these paths are within this general big picture of a unity which no one ever contemplated it was possible, and that was stated clearly without any confusion in the Vedanta, and says this reality, you can experience it. That's the existence part of the thing. It's an extraordinary statement. So,
Namaskar, Anjali here. I think Nirmalida is facing a bit of a network problem here. I request the esteemed guests to take a few questions given by our viewers on YouTube and other social media that we have. There's this question by one Miss Ashwini. She wants to know, how do we expect human beings who struggle to even eat one meal a day to just survive to have access to this philosophy and change themselves? I think, Didi, probably this question is more applicable to you, since you were talking about philosophy of Advaita Vedanta in daily life.
Fortunately, in India, we have many saints in each part of the country, and the saint literature is available in all the languages, and everywhere, without any exception, the Vedanta appears. Vedanta is not just in the Vedas or in the Upanishads. It's so to say the rational explanation or explanation at various levels of consciousness that may be there, may not be there, but in all the literature of all our saints, whether it is Santa Tulsidas, Santa Tukaram, Santa Jnaneshwar, or all the Nayanmars, or Srimanta Shankar Dev in Assam, in everyone's literature we get this Vedanta, and therefore it is not that how do we expect human beings who struggle to even eat a meal a day. My point was that those who are such, to serve them, to see the divinity in them and serve them, this is what the others should do. Those who are in better place, those who are well off, they, instead of sitting in home and doing puja in the house, they should serve man and serve God. That is Shiva Bhave Jiva Seva. So the point is for the those who are in a position to render the service. That point what I mentioned, the application of Vedanta. But because you have mentioned, Ashwin has mentioned in his question that how they will know about the philosophy. So the saint literature also makes us aware. Just a few days before only, I was listening to one song on Tulza Bhavani. So it's a just folk song. But in that folk song also, the line is, the Nirguna Nirakara Mata has appeared as Tulza Bhavani. It starts like that. So it is everywhere.
Right now. In any case, there is a saying that we say that suffering brings us closer to God. So what you're saying is completely true. We have another question posed by one of our viewers on WhatsApp. There is a technical question here saying, what is the difference between the stage of being asleep, deep sleep, and the meditative stage? Dr. Basure, would you like to take this question, please? Dr. Basure, your mic is on mute. May I request you to unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, can you guys hear me now?
Yes,
so,
we can hear you.
Frankly, the straight, simple answer is we really don't know. But there has been a lot of research into both, so I'll try to give a glimpse of what the difference is. So sleep is not a single state. Sleep is multiple state. We have NREM sleep and we have REM sleep. REM sleep is one of the deepest sleep, which lasts maybe 90 minutes to less than 1 hour in the whole night. If you have a 6 or 7 hour sleep, out of that, less than 70 to 1 hour is REM sleep. Most of them is in REM sleep. And there are different stages of NREM sleep. So, what is one particular thing that is very active in most of these sleep, especially NREM sleep? Your brain is very active. One fact that most people don't know, that all of us, every human being on this earth, has grown only at night. Why? Because the growth hormone that makes us from small baby to an adult is released only at night. So the brain is active. Instead of brain sleeping, the brain is super active. Now, meditation. So the brain is active. Most of the brain has basically alpha or beta waves, which are very fast waves, as if you're awake. So if I do EEG on most of the brain when you're sleeping, but not in REM sleep, it will feel like as if you're awake. Based on EEG, that is the seeing the signals of the brain. Though there are some differences, I don't want to go into more details on this. In meditation, and what we find is there are different levels of activity and inactivity. Certain parts of the brain, for example, the base of the brain, or what we call the reptilian brain, which includes hypothalamus, amygdala, their functioning decreases. So all these emotions, hatred, jealousy, these emotions actually gets down. Not only do they not function, even by doing PET scan, we have seen their blood supply also decreases. On the other side, the whole brain, if you see, exhibits slower waves. Slower waves means something called alpha wave or delta wave. Now, what does the slower wave mean? As I said before, uh, Vivekananda described the normal brain like a clear pond where you can see the bottom of the pond. You go on throwing small rocks into it. You won't be able to see the bottom because the pond is filled with ripples. That's the normal human brain. And when you practice meditation, you start having slower and slower waves. So these ripples are the beta waves. And when you start practicing, you get slower and slower wave. Some Buddhist monks and some Hindu rishis, 22 years of meditation, have been even shown to have delta or gamma waves, especially gamma waves, which are found in newborn babies inside mother's womb. Now, there is some thought in the neuroscience community that these very slow waves could be the waves of basic consciousness. And that's why meditators, when after deep meditation, they can, as I said in my talk, that they slowly understand the nature of this universe, because it's like a radio station. You want to hear a good song, you have to go to that particular radio station and try to tune in. Similarly, if you want to hear the song of the universe, the song of the nature, the song of creation, you have to tune in. So these are a couple of differences, but as I said, the sleep is a more different state. There's not a single state called sleep. It has got different levels, and the brain behaves completely differently in each of them. Contrarily, meditation is a more singular state, though there are different depths of meditation. Some parts of the brain actually gets hyperactive. That is the bridge that connects your left and right brain gets hyperactive, while most of the other function, like the reptilian brain, the oldest brain that we share with the dinosaurs, with reptiles, with alligators, crocodile, that brain is completely shut off. In many rishis, you find that brain is completely inactive, that doesn't even exist. Whereas other brain, like the cerebral cortex, which has come to us for a few thousand years after we became human beings, that brain gets more.
I'm
Thank
sorry
you.
that.
May I ask one more question from the viewer? There's one Muhammad Firdaus Alamji who has asked this question. I think this question is apt for Dr. Rajeshri Ray. He's asking here, why do people suicide and how it can be stopped as per the Vedanta?
Thank you, Firdaus Alamji, for a very, very pertinent and relevant question. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Suicide is one of the most, it's a medical emergency that we deal in psychiatry, because if really once completed, we just cannot have someone back again in life, and we've lost a life. Now, there are multiple factors why a person may commit suicide. We look at a biological, psychological, and a social model for it. Some people actually have, a family history of suicide. It just makes them more susceptible to it, because probably their chemical structures, the genetic structures, sort of transforms their personalities, which influences their coping skills, their ability to form interpersonal relationships, their ability to believe themselves, their levels of frustration, impulsivity. Multiple factors come in the genetic component. Of course, then there are certain environmental factors, the situation the person is in, and how, whether there's a loss, a bereavement, anything that impacts negatively on the life. And of course, the social factors, like the financial status, the family, friends, the support network the person has. So there's never a one reason why a person may potentially try to take his own life, or actually does take his own life. However, the question now is, what can Vedanta, help in understanding this? Of course, we don't have too much of literature in this, but my personal take on this would be, as I mentioned, the acts of self-control and self-regulation. If we, for sort of these two things, focuses very much in reducing impulsivity, in regulating your own emotions, in having an understanding and adjustment with the world, in giving you a sense of self, being positive about yourself, loving yourself, and understanding, we are part of the universal consciousness. And if something affects me, I'm not alone in this whole world. I'm part of this multitude, of everyone together. So just a simple assurance to a person, that you're not really alone. I am with you. This simple teaching from Vedanta can take us a long way in our day-to-day clinical practice of someone, giving them the hope that, there is something coming out. We are part of this universe together, and believe yourself, regulate yourself. So that is, just a very brief answer to a big question. Thank you.
The next question is, the real nature of man is already perfect. Why do we suffer despite this perfection? It's open to all. Didi, would you like to answer this question? The question, I repeat, the real nature of man is already perfect. Why do we suffer despite this perfection?
This can be answered in many ways. One is that the man's nature is perfect, but is he aware of it? That is the point. That is why he suffers. He suffers because of the ignorance, because not knowing his nature. And having no conviction. He may know it intellectually, the Vedanta, but if conviction is not there, I will just give a very brief experiment. It is from psychiatry only. So there was one man, and he considered himself that he has become a small chick. So he was afraid to go to the road and all that. Then his wife took him to a psychiatrist. He treated him. He told, see, chick is only this much. You are so tall. You are man. You are not chick. And all that was done. And he started repeating, yes, I am a man. I am not chick. And then the psychiatrist said, now your husband is okay. So the husband came. Then next day he went on his job. So he went out of the house, and in few minutes he came running back. So when he came running back, his wife asked, what happened? Then he said, there is dog on the road. Because he's chick, so dog will eat. That fear earlier used to be there. She said, yes, but are you chick? Then he said, no, I know I am a man, but whether that dog knows I am a man. So the problem is, our conviction is only intellectual. When that real conviction comes, and at that time, this suffering will not be there. So this is one way of looking at it. Swami Vivekananda also had told a story about a lion and a goat.
Nivedita Didi, in AAYM logo, there are 3 words: Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. How can they be explained in the light of Vedanta? These are 3 words which are below our logo. Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. I think Nivedita Didi's link is a little disturbed because that is the far end of our country. So, Professor Stein, would you like to reply to this
Yes,
question?
yes. See, one of the great strengths of the Indian civilization compared to the Greek civilization was that India embraced infinity, Anantam. It was a central part. If you look at any of the Vedanta, any of the Upanishads, they will tell you that you remove thing infinite from something, infinite remains. Okay, so the truth, right, infinity, and knowledge, those are the 3 pillars which are essential part of this heritage, of cultural heritage of the Upanishads. Okay, so they say that you have to have knowledge, then you have to truth, knowledge, and infinity. There is a Chandogya Upanishad has a little verse which I will tell you in English. It says, where there is creation, there is progress. Where there is no creation, there's no progress. Know the nature of creation. Where there's joy, there's creation. Where there's no joy, there's no creation. Know the nature of joy. Where there's infinite, there is joy. There's no joy in the finite. So this is something which is applicable to any creative enterprise. It's including the cultivation of knowledge. So infinity is a rock. Whereas if you look at the Greek geometry, it's all finite. You have a triangle and things. India, if you look at the Sanskrit grammar, Sandhi and Samash allow you to have infinite number of words which can be built. So in the system, Indian system, this is a profound inbuilt thing in the genes of the people of the country. It's amazing.
Thank you, Professor Shen. Now there is a question from Amadapati Eravalli. The question is existence in multiple choices the best example of prana of a person?
Existence of multiple...
Is existence in multiple choices the best example of prana of a person?
See, this multiple choice kind of multi-universe picture of which some people in physics... See, I've worked in string theory, I've worked on black holes, I've looked at Calabi-Yau manifolds and so forth. But the bottom line is that those speculations are speculations. At present, the string theory system cannot reproduce the grand unified thing at all. There's a swamp, the landscape swamp. There are so many possibilities. So in other words, one should not be using a metaphor, right, which is not sound and which automatically does not help. So in other words, if something is going to be helpful, you should see the help in stage 1, right? So at this stage, if it gives someone pleasure and gives someone joy, I'm all for it. But to take an idea of a particular system of medicine, right, that could be at a metaphor, could be very, very suggestive. But as soon as you go into the details, then it starts losing credibility. Yeah, as a metaphor, some of these things are fantastic. But as I kept going back to this idea of the Brihad Aranyak Upanishads and the rain and so forth, those things one should not take that seriously.
We'll finish within next 2-3 minutes, as we have already crossed the time limit. Now there is a question which is probably addressed to Rajeshri, though nothing is mentioned as such. How can I deal with suffering?
How can I deal with suffering? See, suffering is a relative concept. A suffering to me may not be a suffering to someone else. But of course, to the person, the suffering is a real concept. So we have to understand what is the what is happening behind the suffering. Why is it that we are feeling this way? Suffering, yes. So suffering. So we have to understand why we are suffering. What is the feeling and the reason for the suffering? Okay. Because sometimes, we fail to understand the real truth. What is our existence? What is our purpose? As Nivedita just sort of mentioned, who we are. We try to associate ourselves with this materialistic body, our ego systems, our things around us. And when the expectations do not meet, what we are getting, that is when the suffering comes. But when we realize it's nothing is mine, the ego-centered is not there, there's nothing I behind it. We're all part of this universal concept, the suffering will not be there, it will disappear. But saying that in realistic terms, when I work with my patients, because always I'm a very grounded person, I have to be talking about what do I do with someone who's sitting in front of me and managing the suffering. We work it out, we use certain principles to work out and tease out the issues behind the suffering and help them to understand, there are certain things that are modifiable. There are certain things you can change. There are certain things you cannot change in your life. So the certain things you cannot change, we go to the theory of acceptance theory, which is our mindfulness-based theory. And, it's a lot of Buddhist principles, but there's a lot of things from our Hindu scriptures behind it. So acceptance becomes very important. And of course, the ones that you can change, we try to work with them to help them realize, what are the ways you can change your cognitive faculties? Because as the Vedanta start, you are what you think. Your thoughts are what you are. So once you start understanding, these are the things I can change, and how I change it comes in my own mind, then, a lot of the suffering can be minimized. Over to you, Nirmaluda. I'm trying to be a little
before I formally thank all the speakers, I have two announcements. One, our next webinar is Yoga for Depression on 16th of January. We'll send you posters with the links. And the next webinar is on COPD. In COPD webinar is on 30th of January. We have a speaker from USA, we have a speaker from US, and one speaker from India. Now, I heartily thank all the speakers, including Indranil, who is our chairman, Professor Sen, Rajshri, and Nivedita Didi. It was an excellent experience for all of us. I believe there will be a lot of hits on our YouTube and Facebook pages, and we'll try to forward your speech to you by email. All the best. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So the program ends here.
किमावरीवः कुह कस्य शर्मन्नम्बः किमासि गहनं गभीरं न मृत्युरासीदमृतं न तर्हि न रात्या अनासि प्रकेतः सृष्टि से पहले सत नहीं था असत भी नहीं अंतरिक्ष भी नहीं आकाश भी नहीं था छिपा था क्या कहाँ किसने ढका था उस पल तो अगम अतल जल भी कहाँ था। नहीं थी मृत्यु, थी अमरता भी नहीं, नहीं था दिन रात भी नहीं, हवा भी नहीं, सांस थी स्वयमेव फिर भी, नहीं था कोई कुछ भी, परम तत्व से अलग या परे भी। काम बनकर वह जगह कवियों ज्ञानियों ने जाना, असत और सत का निकट संबंध पहचाना। पहले संबंध के किरण धागे तिरछे, परम तत्व उस पल ऊपर या नीचे, वह था बटा हुआ पुरुष और स्त्री बना हुआ, ऊपर दाता वही भोक्ता, नीचे वसुधा स्वदा हो गया।
सृष्टि ये बनी कैसे, किससे आई है, कहाँ से, कोई क्या जानता है, बता सकता है। देवताओं को नहीं ज्ञात, वे आए सृजन के बाद। सृष्टि को रचा है जिसने, उसको जाना किसने।